Maya wasn't in the mood for games. She had spent the whole week trying to meet deadlines, answering emails, and pretending her life wasn't falling apart at the edges. When her younger sister Emma texted her saying, "Show up at this place, 7 p.m. Just trust me." Maya knew better than to ask questions. Emma's plans were always unpredictable and often humiliating. Still, something made her go. She arrived at a small cafe nestled between two upscale boutiques. The warm glow from inside spilled onto the sidewalk, casting soft amber light against the glass. Inside, the clinking of cutlery, gentle laughter, and the sound of jazz guitar created a kind of magic. Maya entered cautiously, wearing jeans, boots, and a soft navy sweater. She hadn't dressed to impress. She was expecting a joke. A hostess greeted her, and without asking for her name, smiled knowingly and led her toward a small table in the far corner. A man was already seated there. He looked up from a leather-bound notebook, his expression calm, composed. He stood as she approached. "Maya?" he asked. She paused. "Yes, you're right on time." He gestured to the chair opposite his. Maya sat, unsure. He was nothing like she imagined. No awkwardness, no forced charm. His suit was tailored, his hair slightly tousled, his presence steady, quiet even. He looked at her like he was seeing someone he already recognized. She glanced around, half expecting Emma to pop out laughing. But no one came. No prank, no cameras, just the man in front of her studying her with a kind of gentle certainty. Her sister said it would be funny, but Maya could already feel. This wasn't a joke. This was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. Maya folded her hands in her lap, trying to ignore how unexpectedly serious this felt. Across the table, the man, who still hadn't said his name, wasn't fidgeting, wasn't glancing at his phone. He was just present. He looked at her with genuine interest, like she was the only person in the room. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "So," she finally said, forcing a casual tone, "how do you know Emma?" His smile widened slightly. "I don't." That stopped her cold. "You don't," she repeated. He shook his head. "I got a message from my assistant this morning. Said a meeting had been arranged with someone named Maya, 7 p.m. at this cafe. I thought it was a networking thing at first." He tilted his head, amused. "But clearly this is something else." Maya's heart skipped. That meant Emma had somehow matched her with a stranger, a total stranger. She could already imagine her sister doubled over with laughter, waiting for the chaos to unfold. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, reaching for her bag. "I think this was a mistake." "Wait," he said, his voice calm. "I know this wasn't your idea, but you're here. I'm here. Would it be so bad to sit and talk?" There was no pressure in his words, just curiosity. Something about him, his quiet confidence, his composure, stopped her. She slowly settled back into her seat. "All right," she said softly. "Just coffee." He nodded. "Coffee it is." The waiter arrived. Orders were placed. And then, for the first time in what felt like months, Maya exhaled. Because something about this man, this stranger, felt strangely safe, and she had no idea why. The conversation began cautiously. Maya offered only surface-level details: her job at a marketing firm, her love for old bookstores, her allergy to cats. He listened without interrupting, offering nods, thoughtful expressions, the occasional half-smile. His name, she eventually learned, was James, just James. No last name, no job title, no business card. But there was something unmistakable about him. His watch was understated, but rare. The stitching on his jacket was flawless. And when the waiter brought the coffee, he thanked him by name, without ever having been introduced. Maya noticed the details. She always did. And something wasn't adding up. "You said you thought this was a networking meeting?" she asked, sipping her drink. James leaned back, fingers lightly tapping the rim of his cup. That's what I assumed. My assistant usually screens everything. But this came through a personal channel, so I figured, why not? A vague answer. She tilted her head. You're being very vague, he smiled again, this time with a flicker of mischief. Let's just say I wear a lot of hats, some heavier than others. There it was again, something just beneath the surface. She wanted to press, but stopped herself. He wasn't hiding in a suspicious way. He was simply choosing not to lead with power. And for some reason, that made her curious instead of skeptical. She looked around the cafe, filled with quiet couples, clinking mugs, and soft music. This wasn't where you expected to meet someone important, but she was starting to think he might be. Not because he acted like it, but because he didn't have to. And as their coffees cooled, Maya realized something strange. She didn't want this to be over yet. Time passed more quickly than Maya realized. What started as a tense meeting with a stranger had turned into something warm, easy. They spoke about their favorite cities, books they never finished, songs that reminded them of old friends. He made her laugh, not forced laughter, but the kind that slipped out unexpectedly. And she noticed how he leaned in when she spoke, how he remembered little details she didn't think mattered. James never boasted. He never named companies, never mentioned wealth, power, or status, but the clues were there if you paid attention. The way the staff at the cafe glanced at him, not with recognition, but with deference. The quiet way he tipped the waiter without fanfare. The phone on the table, sleek and custom-made, buzzing silently every 10 minutes, each time ignored. Maya tried not to let herself overthink it, but she was a realist. Men like this didn't usually come into her world, and certainly not by accident. So, she said after a pause, do you do this often? He raised an eyebrow. Coffee with strangers, she nodded. Not unless my assistant tricks me into it. She laughed. Well, my sister tricked me into this one, so I guess we're even. James looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable behind his eyes. Then he said it, simple, direct. You're exactly what I was hoping for. Maya blinked, startled. He didn't say it like a line. It wasn't flirtation. It was conviction. Before she could reply, he added gently, I know that sounds strange, but I mean it. And for the first time in years, Maya didn't feel like she was performing. She felt seen, and something inside her stirred that she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. Maya wasn't easily rattled, but those words, "You're exactly what I was hoping for," echoed in her chest long after they'd been spoken. She sipped her coffee slowly, searching for something clever to say, something that wouldn't betray how his words had landed. But James didn't push. He leaned back, as if giving her space to sit with it. There was no rush in him, no agenda, just quiet presence. They spoke again, this time about family. Maya admitted with a hint of eye roll how Emma was the wild one, the spontaneous one, the type to book last-minute flights and send her older sister on blind dates for sport. James listened, nodding. He told her his family was complicated, and that he'd been raised in an environment where trust was earned slowly and affection was often transactional. It wasn't dramatic. He shared it like a fact. But Maya heard the weight behind it. There were layers to him, stillness that wasn't cold, distance that wasn't disinterest. He didn't speak like a man used to small talk. He spoke like someone who spent most of his time being misunderstood. And somehow she understood that. Outside, night had fully settled over the city. The cafe had emptied little by little, but neither of them had moved. The staff began to sweep in the corners, turn off decorative lights. Maya checked her phone. Nearly 3 hours had passed. She looked back at James, half expecting him to glance at his watch and make an excuse. But he didn't. He just asked softly, "Do you want to keep talking somewhere else?" Maybe take a walk. Maya hesitated for a breath, then nodded. And just like that, the night shifted again, this time into something even more unfamiliar. Possibility. The city felt different at night. Quieter, softer. The usual chaos dulled into a hum beneath the glow of street lamps and headlights. Maya walked beside James, their steps in rhythm, though neither mentioned it. The cold wasn't biting, just crisp enough to feel alive. They didn't talk at first, and it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Eventually, he pointed out a bookstore he used to visit when he first moved to the city, said he liked the way it smelled, like paper and time. She smiled. She confessed she once bought a book just for the cover and never read a page. That made him laugh, the sound low and warm. They passed a musician playing violin near a closed market. James paused, pulled out a bill, placed it gently in the open case. No flourish, no look around for approval move, just quiet generosity. Maya studied him again, this man who was clearly more than he let on. Everything about him, the way he moved, the way people subtly reacted when he passed, whispered wealth, power, presence, but he wore it like a second skin, not to impress, just to exist. "I have to ask," she said finally, slowing her pace. "Who are you, really?" He glanced at her, not surprised. He stopped walking, and so did she. "I'm someone who has everything most people want," he said calmly. "Except the one thing I've never been able to buy." Maya's chest tightened. She didn't speak. He didn't elaborate. He just looked at her, not for validation, but for recognition. As if he wasn't hoping to impress her, but for her to see him. And in that moment, under glowing streetlights and between distant city sounds, she did. She saw the man, not the title, and it made all the difference. They walked a few more blocks in silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. It wasn't awkward, it was careful, like two people walking around something delicate neither of them wanted to break. Maya kept glancing at him, wondering what kind of life he actually lived. She still didn't know his last name, didn't know what business empire he surely ran, or how many headlines he'd probably appeared in, and yet she didn't care. That surprised her. They stopped near a small overlook above the river. City lights shimmered on the water's surface like broken stars. James rested his hands on the railing, breathing in the air as if he'd missed it. Maya stood beside him. He turned to her, his expression calm but focused. "Would you have stayed," he asked, "if you knew who I was when you walked in tonight?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I mean," he continued, "if you'd recognized my name, if you knew the net worth, the stories, the complications." Maya didn't answer right away. She thought about Emma's joke. About the version of herself who almost didn't show up. About the man sitting across from her now, quiet, real, and far more vulnerable than his status would ever suggest. "I might have judged you," she said finally, "but I would have been wrong." He didn't respond right away, just nodded once, slowly, like that was the answer he had been afraid to hope for. And then gently, he said, "You're not what I expected." Maya smiled. "Neither are you." For the first time that night, she felt the shift in her own heart. This wasn't just chance, it was something waiting for both of them to be ready. They stayed by the river a little longer, not saying much. There was no need. Maya could feel the weight of the unspoken. Everything he hadn't said about who he was, what he owned, what people expected of him, and everything she hadn't admitted to herself about why she felt so drawn to this man she'd known for only hours. Eventually, he broke the silence. "I don't usually do this." She turned to him. "Blind dates?" He chuckled. "No, let people in." Maya didn't press for details, but she understood. Letting people in, truly in, wasn't easy when the world only saw your surface. She knew that from her own walls, her own tendency to guard herself with sarcasm and control. Then, carefully, he pulled out a card from his coat. Just his name. James Arden. No titles, no logos. But it was enough. She knew the name. Everyone did. Arden Industries, one of the largest private tech empires in the country. Quiet, powerful, ruthless in negotiations, obsessively private. And now, here he was, handing her that name like it wasn't a shield. Maya stared at the card, her fingers tightening slightly. He watched her closely. "You can leave now," he said softly, "if it's too much." She looked up, steady. "No," she said. "But now I know why you were afraid I'd treat you differently." James nodded. "Most people do." "Well," she said, slipping the card into her coat pocket, "I'm not most people." His smile returned, not the polished, rehearsed kind. The real one. Maya didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing with certainty. This was no longer just a joke. This was the beginning of something honest, and maybe something rare. They walked again, this time slower, not from hesitation, but from comfort. The kind of pace that didn't feel rushed, as if time itself had softened for them. Maya still held his card in her coat pocket, a thin sliver of truth that somehow made everything feel heavier and more real. James didn't speak for a while, neither did she. But it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes after a confession, when nothing more needs to be said, and yet everything has changed. They stopped near a quiet park bench under a street lamp. Its light cast a warm halo around them, turning their shadows into soft outlines on the pavement. James sat first, then gestured gently for her to join. "I like moments like this," he said finally, "where no one's performing." Maya nodded. "You must get a lot of performance." "Only always," he replied. There was no bitterness in his tone, just acceptance. Maya thought of her own masks, how often she kept people at arm's length, how even her laughter was sometimes scripted to keep things light. She didn't expect someone like him to feel the same, but he did. She looked at him differently now, not as a billionaire, not as someone impressive, but as someone human, quietly craving what most people never imagined he lacked: connection, trust, peace. She didn't ask what he was looking for that night, but she began to understand that maybe he hadn't known either until she walked in. And now, sitting beside him in the hush of the city's edge, Maya realized something even more surprising than his identity. She wanted to see him again. Not because of who he was, but because of who she was around him. James walked her to her car. The streets had grown quieter, and the city now felt like theirs alone. The kind of stillness that only came late, when most of the world had gone home, and only the ones who didn't want the night to end remained. Maya leaned against the door, the metal cool beneath her hands. They were facing each other again, closer now. Something about the space between them had changed. Not just comfort. Something unspoken, tender and quietly electric. "I don't want tonight to be just a strange coincidence," he said, voice low. She met his eyes. "Neither do I." For someone who had been tricked into a date by her sister as a joke, that admission surprised her, but she meant it. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second card. This one had a different number, a direct line. "No assistance, no filters," he said. "If you want to talk again, this one's yours." She took it without hesitation. "Why me?" she asked. "Out of all the people in your world, why did tonight matter?" He paused, then answered with gentle certainty. "Because you didn't know who I was. And still, you saw me." Maya looked down at the card in her hand, then back at him. It wasn't about the money or power or status. It was about being seen. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like someone had looked straight into her without needing her to prove anything. She didn't kiss him. He didn't try. They didn't need to. They just smiled, standing in that quiet, golden-lit street like two people who had unexpectedly stepped out of their own lives and into something real. The next morning, Maya woke before her alarm. Sunlight spilled through her curtains, golden and soft, but she stayed still for a long while, staring at the ceiling. The date, or whatever it was, played back in her mind in fragments. His eyes, his voice, the silence between them. And those final words, "You saw me." She rolled over, reached into her coat from the night before, and pulled out the second card. No title, no company, just a name and a number. She placed it on her nightstand like something fragile. Emma called a few hours later. Maya almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of her. "Well?" her sister asked, voice laced with laughter. "Was it terrible? Did he wear socks with sandals? Did you run away?" Maya smiled faintly, unsure what to say. "He wasn't what I expected." Emma laughed. "Oh, come on. I found that guy through a friend of a friend's roommate. No way he wasn't awkward."